There is a particular despair that settles over a couple when they realize they have traveled thousands of miles only to have the same argument they have had for 15 years. John Gottman opens Why Marriages? Succeed or fail with exactly that scene, and uses it to make a claim that was startling when the book appeared. The forces deciding whether a marriage lives or dies are not mysterious, not unique to each couple, and not beyond measurement. They can be observed, coded, timed, and predicted. Gottman is not a counselor offering hunches from his caseload. Trained as a mathematician and a research psychologist, he reports on 2 decades of laboratory work, in which hundreds of couples were wired to instruments, filmed, coded second by second, and tracked for years. His contention is that most of what people believe about marriage, including much of what professionals believe, is unproven or simply wrong. What predicts survival is not compatibility, but the emotional arithmetic of how a couple handles difference. This summary follows his sequence: the science and the myths it dissolves, the 3 ways stable marriages work, the 2 cascades by which unstable ones come apart, the differences men and women bring to the same house, and the remedies. Chapter 1. What makes marriage work? The numbers come first. More than half of first marriages end in divorce. Second marriages fail at roughly 60%. Gottman cites a 1989 University of Wisconsin analysis of census records finding that, on 1985 data, divorce among recent first marriages stood at 67%. What made this worse was that nobody could say why. Almost no rigorous science had been done. The advice literature rested at best on what therapists happened to observe in the couples who happened to walk through their doors. His research began with one couple he calls Bob and Wendy, drawn together by opposites, her spontaneity, his even temper, and now disdaining in each other exactly what once charmed them. On a hunch, he videotaped them, playing a ranking exercise called the NASA moonshot problem. They were superb, cooperative, funny, visibly affectionate. Asked to discuss a real marital problem, the harmony collapsed. Watching the tapes with them and asking what each had been thinking at critical moments, Gottman found a history of unresolved conflict beneath trivial skirmishes. His need for autonomy, her need to be valued. What they wanted, like nearly every couple he would later study, was 2 things: love and respect. What they had built was a system in which each could hear only the other's criticism. The governing analogy is cardiology, and it required a laboratory, a furnished studio apartment at the University of Washington with ceiling cameras, where couples sit in facing chairs on platforms that measure fidgeting, wired for heart rate and perspiration, and talk for 15 minutes about a real disagreement. Each then watches the tape twice with a dial, turning from positive through neutral to negative, first rating their own feelings moment by moment, then guessing their partner's. Coders later assign labels ranging from disgust, contempt and belligerence to validation, affection and joy. The methods were refined in 1980 at Indiana University with Robert W. Levinson on 30 couples, work that first linked marital satisfaction to spouses' physiological responses. A study of 79 couples begun in 1983 was checked in 1987 and replicated at the University of Illinois. Further work followed 130 newlyweds and, with Levinson at Berkeley and Laura Carstensen at Stanford, 160 never-divorced marriages of 20 and 40 years standing. In one study, Gottman predicted with 94% accuracy which couples would divorce 3 years later, based solely on how they described their history. The chapter's second task is demolition. The money myth, financial trouble roughly doubles divorce risk, but G.H. Elder, Jr.'s Children of the Great Depression, found that couples strong before the crash grew stronger as wives and children pitched in. While already troubled families were torn apart, husbands drifting further from the dinner table as money worsened. Crisis amplifies what is already there. The sex myth, Gottman answers with Annie Hall, where both therapists ask about frequency and receive the same number with opposite adjectives: constantly, hardly ever, 3 times a week. And the compatibility myth, which he treats most carefully because it has the best research behind it. David H. Olson of the University of Minnesota developed Prepare, a 125-item premarital questionnaire covering 11 areas administered by clergy. 3 years on, satisfied couples had indeed scored higher beforehand. but the instrument could not say which of the many dissatisfied couples would stay and which would go, and that is the crucial question. In Gottman's own data, couples who began with complaints about each other's attitudes were among the most stable years later. Occasional discontent, especially early, appears good for a marriage. That inversion sets up the book. Healthy marriages settle into three styles of resolving conflict: validating, conflict-avoiding, and volatile. And all three, Gottman claims, are equally stable. What makes any of them work is a single ratio of positive to negative moments. What destroys them is the sequence he names the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Chapter 2. Marriage Styles, the Good, the Bad, and the Volatile. Gottman opens with Ralph and Alice Cramden of The Honeymooners and then presents three real couples. Bert and Betty Oliver made communication a deliberate priority because neither set of parents had modeled it. Max Connell and Anita Gallo quarrel far more than average, nearly called off their wedding twice, and spend far more time laughing and touching than fighting. Joe and Sheila Nelson are matched bookends, same suburbs, same schools, same church, same horses, who fight rarely and mention almost in passing that he wants sex considerably more often than she does, a matter left unresolved. 4 years later, all three were still happily married. Anyone who guessed that only Bert and Betty would survive, Gottman notes dryly, has probably read too many books about communication. Validators are the counselor's ideal, and their mark is a three-phase sequence. Each speaks while the other listens and reflects back. Then comes good-natured persuasion, then compromise. Validation is not agreement. It signals that the other's feelings are legitimate. Betty complains they never go out. Bert reflects her wish back and explains his exhaustion. Together they uncover the real mechanism. Bert had been performing tiredness to preempt pressure, with the result that they went out not at all. They settle on 4 evenings a month. Drawing on Mary Ann Fitzpatrick's work at the University of Wisconsin, Gottman notes validators' conventional sex roles and separate spheres of influence, their habit of finishing each other's sentences, their prizing of we-ness over individual goals. The shadow risk is a marriage that becomes a passionless friendship, romance and selfhood traded for togetherness. Volatile couples skip the first phase entirely. They arrive already persuading, and winning is the point. Their dialogue is a hail of yes you do and no I don't. The counterintuitive finding is that these marriages are frequently excellent because the volcanic arguments are a small fraction of a warm whole. Volatile couples express more negative emotion and also more positive, more anger, more laughter, more affection than the average validating pair. They see themselves as equals, keep separate personal spaces, and prize honesty so highly they censor almost nothing. That commitment is both exhilarating and dangerous. In one taped exchange, Judy's frank admission that sex with a stranger might be enjoyable led Tom to recall his own wandering attention, and the two drifted into discussing separation, ending with an unease that had not been in the room when they sat down. Avoiders are more accurately conflict minimizers. When Joe and Sheila discuss their sexual mismatch, neither attempts persuasion and no compromise is reached. Sheila calls herself resigned, and both conclude their other compatibilities outweigh it. Avoiders appeal instead to a shared philosophy of marriage, reaffirm what they value and accept the rest, often ending an unresolved discussion feeling perfectly good about each other. The dangers are that they are left unschooled should a conflict arrive that cannot be minimized, and that the marriage can become lonely. Gottman illustrates with Bill and Jane, who fought throughout the building of a house financed by Jane's father, a man who turned up on site to veto light fixtures. The real tension, Bill's resentment, Jane's divided loyalty, was never once named. They fought instead about whether a newspaper had advertised a paint sale. Then comes the finding the book is remembered for. Charting time spent fighting against time, spent touching, smiling, complimenting, and laughing, Gottman found one ratio in stable marriages, regardless of style: 5-1. Couples heading for divorce showed slightly more negative than positive. He offers 2 images: a stereo in which the positive speaker emits 5 times the power at any volume, and the pH of soil on which fertility depends. Volatile couples run the system loud and must generate enormous positivity to offset the noise. Avoiders run it quietly and need less. Strikingly, anger is absent from his list of destructive emotions. Anger damages a marriage only when it arrives carrying criticism, contempt, or defensiveness. And because closed systems run down, he reaches for the second law of thermodynamics. A marriage in which nothing is done wrong, but nothing is done at all, will still decay. Beneath it all, he places two nutrients, love and respect, the direct opposites of contempt. In the long-term study, he watches Mike and Dorothy flirt in a private sign language during the silent rest periods between tasks, and a couple who met as Berkeley peace activists still relish a 20-year argument about free speech, each gaining esteem in the other's eyes as the arguments sharpened. In this ecology, negativity is the predator that keeps the herd honest. Too many lions, and it is destroyed, too few, and it dies of its own excess. Couples who fought were less satisfied at first, but more stable 3 years later than the peaceful ones. Chapter 3. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Warning Signs. Against 3 stable adaptations, Gottman sets 2 portraits of collapse. The hostile/engaged couple argues hotly. Fred asks about his dry cleaning, Ingrid mocks the question and tells him to fetch it himself, and he replies that she would not know how to clean anything. The hostile/detached couple yells without listening or looking. Molly answers that if she must keep every problem to herself, she might as well live alone. He then takes issue with Tolstoy. The famous opening of Anna Karenina holds that unhappy families are each unhappy in their own way, and Gottman calls it woefully inaccurate. Failing marriages closely resemble one another because they descend the same staircase. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling in order of increasing danger. The case carrying the chapter is Eric and Pamela, who married out of college, having agreed to be thrifty and discovered they meant different things by it. He came home with boneless chicken breasts. She pointed out they cost twice as much as bone-in. Over a year, the argument recurred over lights left on, a call placed before the late-night rate, a new pair of gloves. Then Pamela crossed the decisive line. Instead of complaining about an action, she criticized a character. You always do things like that. Just think about yourself. The distinction is the chapter's most useful tool. A complaint is specific and states how you feel. It tends to begin with I. A criticism is global, carries blame, attacks the person, and tends to begin with you. The word should arrive with a wagging finger. Kitchen sinking, heaping every available grievance into one utterance, crushes as thoroughly as a character attack because it feels total, as does the accusation of betrayal. The tell that complaint has become criticism is the arrival of always and never. Contempt is criticism plus the intention to insult. When Eric calls Pamela a stingy cheapskate who does not know how to live and she replies that she did not know she had married a failure, the second horseman has arrived. What makes contempt uniquely corrosive is the immediate decay of admiration. While it operates, a spouse cannot recall a single good quality in the other. Its forms are name-calling, hostile humor, for which Gottman reaches for Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, where Martha nicknames George Swampy for his stalled career, and George replies that in his mind she is buried in cement up to the nose, which is much quieter. Mockery. And body language, sneering, eye-rolling, the curled upper lip. A wife may murmur, "Go on, I'm listening," while picking lint from her skirt, and the face tells the truth. Defensiveness follows because it is the natural reflex of a person under bombardment, which is exactly what makes it destructive. The defender sees nothing wrong with defending. Gottman catalogues its varieties: denying responsibility, making excuses, yes-butting, whining, and the false smile in which the eyes do not change. Disagreeing with negative mind-reading, as when Bruce insists his wife Naomi hates his science fiction writing until she is defending a position she never took. Cross-complaining, the adult form of "so's your old man." Lauren is angry that Steve concealed buying a gun, and Steve replies with the car seat she once hid from him. The rubber man or rubber woman ploy, Carl, confronted about his drinking, asks his wife how her tantrums are any different. And repeating yourself, as Jonathan and Maria do, through an entire conversation about how often he golfs, each restating an unchanged position in hope that volume will persuade. Stonewalling is the worst. Eric stops responding at all. Every argument becomes Pamela shouting that she is talking to a brick wall. Stonewallers typically believe they are being neutral and declining to make matters worse, and do not grasp that stony silence is itself a powerful act, conveying disapproval, distance, and smugness. About 85% of stonewallers are men, and the asymmetry runs deeper than the count. A wife's heart rate climbs sharply when her husband stonewalls, while most men are unmoved when a wife does. The reason all this is fatal is not unpleasantness, but interference. Every marriage generates repair mechanisms. Small comments about the conversation itself. Please let me finish. We're getting off the topic. That hurt my feelings. Because they arrive at moments of frustration, they come coated in irritation, and in a working marriage, the coating is ignored and the repair lands. Gottman's illustration is David and Laura, caught in what he calls wheels within wheels. Laura has settled on a theory that David is trying to dominate her, confirmed by his father's treatment of his mother, and when David says explicitly that he is not trying to dominate her, she hears only the shut-up that preceded it. One reason some marriages are stable is simply that the spouses hear past the edge in a voice to the conciliatory message behind it. Chapter 4. Your private thoughts become cast in stone. The chapter opens on the rooftop scene in Annie Hall, where Alvy and Annie discuss photography, while subtitles reveal what each is actually thinking. The subtitles decide what happens. Two wives receive identical behavior. A husband coming home grouchy and shouting about the state of the house. Betty thinks, he is in a bad mood. I wonder what happened at work. Jane thinks, he is always such a grouch, and since when is cleaning my job? Betty's inner speech is self-soothing and will lead her to approach him gently. Jane's is distress-maintaining and will lead to counterattack or withdrawal. When newlyweds were shown tapes of their own hostile moments and asked what they had been thinking, the distressing thoughts fell into just two categories: innocent victimhood, whose governing emotion is fear, and whose companion horseman is defensiveness, and righteous indignation, which adds hostility and a wish for revenge, and travels with contempt. The consequence of a negative inner script is flooding. Systems overload, in which a person feels so overwhelmed by a partner's negativity and by their own reaction that constructive discussion becomes impossible. Thresholds differ widely. Volatile spouses absorb a great deal. Avoidant ones can be overwhelmed by a complaint, and outside stress lowers everyone's tolerance. Gottman transcribes Yvonne being flooded as her husband Nicholas moves from a hypothetical about giving a colleague a ride to the announcement that he would like to have lunch with a former lover. Her tone shifts from calm to alarmed to fearful, and when he confirms it, she says only that they have a serious problem and need counseling, and falls silent. The physiology is the chapter's core. A man's resting pulse averages about 72 beats per minute, and a woman's about 82. Gottman's data suggest flooding begins near 80 for men and 90 for women, and that at 100 beats adrenaline is secreted in doses large enough to trigger a full fight-or-flight reaction. He tracks this in Bradley and Eloise, a volatile couple whose teasing has gone wrong. She mocked his parallel parking, he retaliated by disparaging her as a lover, and he is now trying to take it back. His pulse is already at 80 when he agrees with her. When he protests that he did not mean it, it jumps to 96.3, a rise of 16 beats within the space of a single heartbeat, and then passes 100. Body and inner script goad each other in a loop, and past a certain arousal, it becomes virtually impossible to think a soothing thought. Chronic flooding produces a catastrophic reversal in perception. The spouse becomes hypervigilant, conditioned like an animal that has learned to panic at a color. In stable marriages, partners see each other through rose-colored glasses. Good behavior is read as evidence of enduring character, bad behavior as passing circumstance. In flooded marriages, the attributions invert. Kindness is a fluke produced by a good week at work, while every fault is the essential person. One husband, having concluded his wife was untrustworthy and selfish, noticed out of a week in which she cooked dinner nearly every night, only the night she went out with friends. Unchecked, this drives the second cascade, the distance and isolation cascade, in 4 stages. You come to see your problems as essentially unfixable. Talking things over begins to seem useless. You begin leading parallel lives, occupying the same house but not the same universe. And finally, loneliness. which raises vulnerability to an affair and, research suggests, to illness, particularly in men. The first step back is the admission itself. I miss you. The chapter ends with Gottman's single most powerful predictor. Nothing foretells a marriage's future as accurately as how a couple retells its past. In the study of 56 couples, 47 of whom could be located 3 years later, 7 had divorced, and everyone had been correctly identified in advance from the history interview alone, along with 37 of the 40 who stayed, for 94% overall accuracy. The factors are specific: chaos versus a sense of control. Dexter and Midge remember waiting longer than they wanted to marry and simply knowing it was right, while Jewel recalls being proposed to during a fight, and Anthony recalls a blind panic after the wedding. Disappointment versus glorifying the struggle. Dwayne and Rita recall believing love conquers all and discovering it does not. Midge and Dexter recall driving each other crazy and being proud they made it through. 3 further factors, weeness, expansiveness, and affection, concern the husband more, perhaps because men show distress earlier. Dexter describes keeping house and handling money together, elaborates at length on what drew him to Midge, and says she was never so beautiful as walking down the aisle. Anthony asks Jewel mid-interview what in the hell they got married for, offers only that the height was right and the weight was right, and says she struck him as lacking common sense. Chapter 5. The 2 marriages, his and hers. The chapter opens with a scene from Sweet Dreams, in which Patsy Cline comes home elated from a performance, and her husband, absorbed in a model ship, asks how it went twice without listening to the answer. Gottman calls this the most common marital impasse there is, a wife seeking connection from a withdrawn husband, and warns that everything following is a generalization that will not fit every couple. In marriage, women tend to be the emotional managers, better attuned to the relationship's weather, more willing to raise problems. The resulting confront-avoid pattern is instantly recognizable, the wife asking what is wrong and the husband insisting with rising irritation that nothing is. The origins lie in childhood, and the training could hardly be worse preparation. Boys and girls begin segregating in preschool and are almost entirely separate by middle childhood, peaking around age 7. A door-to-door survey found 36% of preschoolers reporting opposite-sex playmates, 23% by kindergarten, and almost none by 2nd grade. In those parallel universes, the rules differ. Boys care most about the game, girls care most about the relationship between the players. Boys quarrel endlessly on the ball field, but the last word is almost always to play it over, because the point is to keep the ball in motion. Among girls, a dispute tends to end the game because hopscotch was an excuse for talking. Crying is punished in boys and permitted in girls, so boys learn to hide feeling behind indifference, while girls receive years of instruction in naming it. Gottman offers himself as evidence, recalling that at 14 he read that the purpose of a date was to entertain girls, borrowed a book called 500 Successful Jokes, and delivered them one after another to a girl he had no idea how to talk to. Underneath the socialization, he places biology. Boys have more and longer tantrums and greater difficulty recovering from strong upset, which is one reason they receive so many more messages that emotion is unacceptable. He contrasts 3-year-old Alex, who screams through the drive home and 2 timeouts after being told to leave the playground, with 3-year-old Angeli, who protests just as loudly and is singing along to a Peter Pan tape before they leave the lot. The adult version appears on his instruments. Men flood faster and recover more slowly. He transcribes Kirk, raising a concern about Agnes yelling at their daughters. Her heart rate stays in the low 60s throughout, while his reaches 95.7 before she has said anything substantial. The arousal makes it hard for him to hear her, and it ends in stonewalling. Only when he stonewalls does her rate finally climb to 90. That is the asymmetry in miniature. His silence is self-protection, an attempt not to react, while to her it reads as disapproval and rejection. 2 explanations follow. The male autonomic nervous system may be more sensitive and slower to recover, and men are likelier to rehearse the thoughts that keep them aroused. Criticism alone is usually enough to flood a man. It generally takes outright contempt to flood a woman. The result is the demand-withdraw cycle, the engine of most unhappy marriages. The more wives criticize, the more husbands withdraw. The more husbands withdraw, the more wives escalate. He transcribes Diana trying repeatedly to talk to Bill about their communication, while Bill answers each time with something adjacent and safer. And he reports the chapter's most hopeful finding. In happy marriages, there are no gender differences in emotional expression at all. They emerge only in unhappy ones. Two conflicts recur often enough to warrant separate treatment. On sex, the asymmetry is that for many men, closeness is the goal of the act, rather than its precondition, while for most women, lovemaking confirms intimacy rather than creating it. The complaint Gottman hears repeatedly is that he never touches her or says anything tender unless he wants sex. On housework, he is blunter. Of 50 self-described liberated men who said their wives' careers mattered as much as their own, not one had ever initiated a conversation about dividing the tasks, and one study found that men endorsing feminist ideas do about 4 minutes more housework a day than openly traditional men, one pot or one rug. In the transcript, Lawrence asks Marcia why she does not simply do it all herself. She asks whom he is helping when he cleans. He says her, and she corrects him. Us, because they are two people living together. Gottman cites Claire Rabin and Pepper Schwartz on the mutual benefit of a division both feel is fair, and reports a correlation between how much housework a man does and how healthy he is 4 years later. His closing advice divides. To men, embrace her anger because her intensity is underlining, not attack, and the validation of her feelings matters far more than where the glasses go in the dishwasher. To women, confront him gently, say I feel upset when rather than you never, and remember that he floods easily. To both, accept the differences because there really are two marriages. Chapter 6. Your Marriage, the Diagnosis. This is the book's hinge, and it is deliberately short. Self-tests have been placed throughout the preceding chapters. On marital type, on whether there is enough love and respect, on each of the Four Horsemen, on distress-maintaining thoughts, on flooding, on each stage of the distance and isolation cascade, and on how the couple narrates its past. Here, Gottman asks the reader to assemble those results into a single profile. The governing image is the blood panel, a set of readings telling you which systems are healthy and which need attention, without predicting whether the patient will die. The chapter's real work is to pair each diagnosis with a specific antidote. A mismatch in preferred style calls for choosing a style together. Criticism is treated by learning to make specific complaints, and by validating. Contempt is treated by rebuilding the 5-to-1 ratio and expressing genuine admiration, its exact opposite. Defensiveness and stonewalling are treated by calming down, by non-defensive listening and speaking, and by working on distress-maintaining thoughts. Flooding is the keystone of the whole distance and isolation cascade, so learning to calm down truncates that entire sequence. A negative reading of the marital history is treated by changing distress-maintaining thoughts and deliberately retelling the story in a better light. And the his and hers misunderstandings get gendered prescriptions. Wives master complaint without criticism, since it is criticism that floods husbands into stonewalling. Husbands learn non-defensive listening, validation, and how to bring their own arousal down. This is not general encouragement. Each destructive pattern has been identified in a laboratory, named and matched with a countermeasure. And the countermeasures are few, because most of the problems turn out to be consequences of one another. Chapter 7. The 4 Keys to Improving Your Marriage. Gottman begins by disposing of an assumption. Couples in miserable marriages are not lacking communication skills. The same people negotiate ably with neighbors and colleagues, and a marital discussion going nowhere will be interrupted by a phone call during which one spouse is a model of clarity, only for the old pattern to resume when the receiver goes down. The problem is not skill, but strategy, knowing when to deploy abilities they already have. At the moments when negativity has put those abilities out of reach, he proposes 4 strategies, claims that mastering them puts a couple perhaps 75% of the way to maximum marital happiness, and recommends beginning with an agreement to limit discussions of disagreements to 15 minutes, timed. The first strategy is calming down, the direct application of the flooding research. Because most people are poor judges of their own arousal, Gottman asks couples to take their pulse at the carotid during difficult conversations. Establish a baseline by measuring 3 times while sitting comfortably. If the rate climbs 10% above it, roughly 8 to 10 beats, take a break, and if it passes 100, a break is not optional. Most people guess they need 5 minutes, most in fact require closer to 20, and most believe they have calmed while still 10% above resting. The reason to trust the measured number is the Zillman transfer of excitation effect. A person who returns still aroused takes on whatever emotion the partner is expressing, so if the spouse is still angry, the anger is simply adopted and the timeout wasted. What happens during the break matters more than where it is spent. Too often people use the interval to rehearse vengeance. I won't forgive this, I'll show her. The task is deliberate substitution. This isn't personal, this is a bad moment. But things aren't always like this. Physical routes work too, following the breath with the eyes closed, some people using a word of personal significance such as peace or Jesus. Progressive muscle relaxation, 10 minutes of aerobic exercise, which leaves the pulse lower afterward than before. The second strategy is non-defensive speaking and listening, and its precondition is a decision to hold a positive mindset toward your spouse and reintroduce praise and admiration. His example is Herb, a social drinker whose wife Jan complained that his club left her alone, and who defended himself with the value of his business contacts, until out of nowhere he said, "So what you'd like is that when I get to the club, I call and ask if you want to join me." The atmosphere changed in a sentence. A little later, she told him it was why she had married him. Admiration is the exact opposite of contempt and cannot be faked. Gottman names the paradox therapists know. People do not change except in a climate of acceptance. For the listener, the discipline is to hear intensity as underlining rather than assault. Non-defensive listening does not require agreement. The message that carries is, "I don't see it that way, but I can understand why you might." Its mildest forms, "Go ahead, that makes sense," already work. Its highest is genuine empathy. For habitual stonewallers, he prescribes back-channeling, the nods and murmurs that tell a speaker she has not lost you. He also teaches reading of the face, noting that the mouth carries more information than the eyes. The real smile crinkles the eyes and raises the cheeks, while the fake one moves only the lips, and contempt pulls one corner sideways into a dimple. For the speaker, the device is the X, Y, Z statement. When you did X in situation Y, I felt Z. When you didn't call to say you'd be late for our dinner appointment, I felt frustrated. Gottman compares a good complaint to good directions, go 2 miles and turn right at the gas station with the big plastic dinosaur, against the vague wave of the hand that guarantees you end up nowhere. He applies it to sex, where vagueness is most common and most wounding. Contrasting, "I'm just not very satisfied," with the far more usable, "When you touch me there before we've cuddled, it's hard for me to relax." The third strategy is validation, the antidote to criticism, contempt, and defensiveness at once. It matters especially for men, who tend to answer emotion with a practical solution, when what is wanted is the knowledge of being understood. Its higher forms are taking responsibility, apologizing, which need not be the words "I'm sorry so much as I see what you mean, I was wrong," and honest compliment. Its minimum form is acknowledging the other's point of view without appending a rebuttal, which cancels it. Gottman demonstrates with Bridget and Ward, who have the same conversation twice. She wants adult conversation and some sign of being found attractive after a day with the children. He wants a few minutes of quiet and dinner, which is how he knows he is cared for. In the first version, the two statements pass each other like trains. In the second, identical in content, each begins by naming what the other has just said, and it ends with Bridget observing that they are both needy at the end of the day. The effect is measurable. In a newlywed study, adrenaline secretion fell during validating conversations and rose steadily through non-validating ones. The fourth strategy is overlearning, the one most likely to be skipped. Reading the chapter once is nearly useless. The skills must be rehearsed until automatic, because in the aroused state where they are needed, only overlearned behavior is available. Gottman recounts a colleague's couple, Sue and Luke, taught exactly one thing: that Luke felt like fleeing when Sue expressed strong negativity and should stay and listen instead. Months later, they had just fought while loading the dishwasher. Luke's first thought was resentment that a nice dinner had been ruined. Then he told himself to hang in there, she is not that angry, and stayed. Each fight had been a little easier than the last. Chapter 8. Strengthening the Foundations. The final chapter rests on two claims: that a lasting marriage requires agreement about which style of handling disagreement both partners can live with, and that it requires a continuing supply of positivity. Gottman offers dimensions for couples who never settled the question and now find it running as a subtext beneath every argument. Do you value we-ness above autonomy? Then validating will suit you, if separateness matters more, volatile or avoidant. Do you prize romance and intensity or companionship? How much bald honesty do you want? Volatile couples treat total frankness as the basis of trust, while validators and avoiders choose their moments. Validating and avoiding couples tend toward traditional divisions of household roles, and avoiders are the likeliest of the three to place high value on a shared set of religious or philosophical beliefs to guide their life together. The advice then divides by style, because each style fails in its own way. Validators should pick their battles, acknowledge the other's viewpoint before advancing their own, moderate their emotions during persuasion so the friendship never feels threatened, and guard against the demise of romance. Volatile couples get 7 editorial tips for politeness. Say what you can and want to do, rather than what you cannot. Praise the fresh orange juice rather than the overcooked omelette. Express interest in the other's work and friends. Choose politeness regardless of what your spouse does, since negative reciprocity is the trap of the style. Be direct, but back off when an attack has become humiliating. Gottman transcribes a husband calling his wife's father stupid, watching her cry, and reversing himself to say the man deserves respect for having raised a wonderful wife. Be constantly affectionate, which he calls the key to happiness in this style. And be careful with teasing. Conflict avoiders get the opposite prescriptions. Learn to identify what you feel, using lists of positive and negative feelings and a diary of the physical cues that accompany them. Reaffirm the shared beliefs that hold you together, as the couple he calls Carl and Beth did, by reminding themselves their marriage was sanctified. And learn to level, which for avoiders means gently and persistently restating a feeling while still minimizing the issue. As in the pair who want recessed lights her father will not pay for and drift sideways into the idea of a small bridge loan. Some advice is general. Schedule discussions once the cycle of negativity has begun. 20 minutes, one issue only so kitchen sinking cannot start, at a time when both are rested. Gottman concedes this sounds like a business arrangement and reports that it works anyway. He then maps the 3 phases every argument passes through. Agenda building, where the task is to name one issue and let each state a position, and where validation belongs. Persuasion, the hot phase, where repair mechanisms matter most, and resolution, where the goal is a solution both genuinely accept. Dave wanted a fly fishing vacation, Louise wanted comfort, and they settled on a cabin near the river, cutting other luxuries to afford it. Faked acceptance, he warns, always returns. The repair mechanisms are the chapter's practical heart. The stop action, literally raising a hand and calling it, is a lighter intervention than the 20-minute timeout. Gottman transcribes Sue and Joe escalating over housework until Sue calls it, and their return with an apology and a plan to hire a cleaner. Editing means responding only to the constructive part of what your partner said and ignoring the tone. When he snaps, "Will you stop interrupting me?" you answer, "Go ahead and finish." Gatekeeping directs the traffic. "Go on, tell me the story behind that. I'm not finished." Getting back on beam names the drift. Affection, empathy, and humor all function as repairs. Humor, he notes, begins with the ability to laugh at yourself. Meta-communication steps out of the topic to discuss how the conversation is going. And every couple can borrow the avoider's gift for perspective. This isn't very important compared to everything good about our marriage. Gottman closes on story. The happiest couples are those who accept that all marriages and all spouses have limitations, and who do not attempt to remake each other. A reliable sign of a strong marriage is a couple's tendency to glorify the struggles they have come through, to describe the marriage as a worthwhile journey in which adversity produced closeness. Such couples have not suffered less. They have drawn more meaning from what they suffered. He offers Vicky, who panicked after the wedding and would climb into her husband Ben's lap in an old black chair until they had worked it out, and Blanche and Murray, who lived on bean soup in one room while he worked a job he hated, and who remember not the misery but the fancier meals she made to cheer him and the notes she wrote, which, they mention, she still writes, and they still go out for ice cream cones. He is honest about the limit. If there is no admiration left, no felt respect, no affection, and the whole history seems wasted, then ending the marriage deserves serious consideration. Inconsolable bitterness makes change nearly impossible. But most marriages are salvageable when they feel most hopeless because the capacity to communicate was never lost, only buried. Closing. What Gottman has produced is a natural history of a relationship, careful, humane, and disciplined by data rather than by theory. Its greatest service is the demolition it performs. The idea that couples must be compatible to endure, that a good marriage is a quiet one, that anger is the enemy, all of it falls, and what stands in its place is more demanding and more hopeful at once. Conflict is not the disease. Contempt is the disease, and its opposite is not agreement, but honor. A husband and wife who can complain without indicting each other's character, who can absorb intensity as information rather than as assault, and who can hold 5 warm moments against every hard one, will build something that outlasts nearly anything the world throws at it. Which is why the most important finding may be the one about memory. A marriage is largely constituted by the story its members tell about it, and that story is not fixed. The couples who endure narrate their hardships as a journey taken together, and their spouse's kindness as revelation of character rather than accident. And that is not self-deception, but a truer reading of what a shared life actually is. 2 people bound by promise are not 2 consumers of a service. They are one thing being made, slowly, out of thousands of small acts of attention. The laboratory can measure the acts. It cannot supply the promise, and Gottman never claims otherwise. Read the book for the science, which is superb, and for the remedies, which work. But carry away the older truth it keeps rediscovering under the instruments. Love is not a feeling a marriage runs on, but a discipline a marriage is built by, and the smallest courtesies, interest, gratitude, the willingness to be wrong, are the load-bearing walls. Read why marriages succeed or fail in full. It is short, it is generous, and it will make you kinder to the person across the table tonight.